Thank you so much, Bodil, for those nice words. As Bodil said, I am an affiliated researcher at the Karolinska Institute. I also work at the MRC Epidemiology unit in Cambridge, and I'm also affiliated to the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So obviously, I need to learn how to say no to things. But yeah, I'm working on that. Before starting my PhD, I had the opportunity to do some work in Niassa, which is a province in northern Mozambique. That experience, I would say, fundamentally altered my perception of the daily challenges that people were facing with regards to malnutrition, food insecurity, and infectious diseases. But what became really evident from that experience was how people's daily struggles with these challenges was being increasingly aggravated by climate change. Now, the research that me and my colleagues have spent 4 years on trying to carry forward, it tries to deal with exactly one of the main causes to climate change, and that is our dietary habits. Because we know that today, our current dietary habits, especially in high-income countries such as Norway, Sweden, and many of the high-income countries, they are very high in animal products and low in plant-based foods. They don't not only contribute significantly to the global burden of overweight and obesity and non-communicable diseases, but they're also one of the major contributors to the emissions of greenhouse gases, which in turn lead to climate change. And climate change in turn has its own social and environmental impacts, including biodiversity loss, reduced food yields, ecosystem damage, and altered surface water. And these impacts ultimately implicate human health, especially the health of populations such as the ones living in Niassa, where I was working. So today there is a consensus that we need to try to promote the adoption of sustainable diets in societies. Now the question is, what is a sustainable diet? Is a sustainable diet only a diet that is, environmentally friendly? No, it also includes human health. So a sustainable diet needs to be, health promoting. But it also needs to be socially or culturally acceptable, and it needs to be affordable. So when we speak about sustainable diets, we need to think about this broader, more holistic concept. And achieving an adoption of sustainable diets globally is not only important for reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. You can see that sustainable diets is a link to at least half of the Sustainable Development Goals. But recent research also shows that even if the fossil fuel emissions would stop immediately, we wouldn't reach the 1.5 goal of limiting global warming if we don't change our diets and our food systems. So this is really something that we need to, focus on and work with quite immediately. So knowing that we need to promote sustainable diets, it's really, it's a problem that is global and it's quite acute. We thought in the research group, we had the idea that why not focus on school meals as a way to promote the adoption of sustainable diets. So why school meals? Well, we know from previous research that school meals can impact on eating outside of school, and they can also shape dietary habits that can persist into adulthood, because we know that our dietary habits are shaped when we're young. School meals also they can reach all children in a specific context. Today, if we look at it globally, 1 in every 2 children are being reached by a school meal that is either fully or at least partly subsidized. And in Sweden, we have this quite unique system where all children up to grade 9 receive a fully subsidized free school meal, irrespective of socioeconomic background. And this is enacted in law since 1997. So we're talking about around 200 million lunches that are being served annually at a cost of around 6 billion Swedish crowns, which is around, roughly, I would say, 600 million US dollars, maybe a bit less. And since 2011, we also have enacted in law that the school meals have to follow nutritional recommendations that exist for school meals. And just for those who don't know much about the school meal context, school meals in Sweden are served, as I said, every day. They consist of at least one hot meal, usually 2 meals per day. They are served in a buffet, so children can, it's self-serving, so they can take as much as they want. And it's also accompanied by a salad buffet with lots of different options, crisp bread, butter, as well as a milk. So it's quite, I would say, really generous. And I personally have really, really nice memories from my school lunch growing up in Sweden. So we know this. This is from previous research. We know that school meals can have, an important, play an important role in shaping dietary habits in children that can persist into adulthood. From previous research, we also know in our group, we started to read about a method called linear optimization. And linear optimization, it is the application of a mathematical algorithm. It's been used quite frequently, especially in the corporate world, when aiming to either minimize costs or maximize profits. And it's been historically been quite useful in terms of solving diet problems. And when I say solving diet problems, I mean designing or developing a diet or a dietary pattern that fulfill different types of demands. So for example, in World War II, linear optimization was used to design or develop a diet for the US soldiers in the field that was as cheap as possible, but still fulfilling all the energy and nutrient needs of the US soldiers. And during the past 10 years, linear optimization has also been used to find the best balance between different demands of sustainability, such as cost, climate impact, and nutritional adequacy. So we knew this from previous research, that linear optimization, it's a good method as for solving a diet problem. We knew about the potential of school meals. But we also had, based on that, we also had identified some knowledge gaps. So first of all, we didn't know at that time what role school lunches was playing to children's overall diets in Swedish primary schools. And primary school in Sweden is up to grade 9. We didn't know how optimization could be used to design sustainable meals in schools. We didn't know if we could combine optimization with meal planning, and this is another detail that school meals in Sweden are planned in the municipality. So there's usually 1 or 2 people in the municipality that plan all public sector meals. We also didn't know if optimized or sustainable school meals would be acceptable to students in schools. And we didn't know what factors that could be of importance to successfully being able to implement sustainable school meals at scale. So we had a number of questions that we wanted to answer. And so we developed this Optima project that I will present today. I will present all of the 4 studies that we conducted and also the findings. The overall aim of the project was to contribute to knowledge of how sustainable dietary habits could be achieved through the school meal system in theory, as well as in practice. And so the first study it investigated the role of the school lunch to children's overall diets in Sweden. So here we wanted to set a baseline on what children were actually eating in school as well as outside of school today. The second study was a modeling study where we wanted to find or develop a strategy for how to optimize school meals with regards to climate impact, nutritional adequacy, acceptability, and affordability. In the third study, we wanted to bring the knowledge from the second study. We wanted to use this developed optimization strategy, apply that to a menu, and then test that menu that was optimized with our new method in schools. So that was an intervention study. And then the fourth study was a qualitative study where we wanted to explore and understand how sustainable school meals could be implemented successfully at scale. So we were looking at barriers as well as facilitators to implementation. And as I said, I will go through all the four studies together with you today. And I also wanted to say and encourage that if you have any pressing questions that you would like to ask, now, that's fine with me. And then if there are more overarching questions that you would like to ask afterwards, that's also fine. But if you have a question, just please raise your hand and I'm happy to answer. So the first study, as I mentioned, it aimed to look at how children's school lunch intake contributes to the overall dietary intake of different age and within different age and socio-demographic groups. And here we use data from Riksmaten Adolescent. It's a national dietary survey conducted in 2016-2017 in Sweden. Looking at the dietary intake of pupils in grades 5, 8, and as well as 11, which is high school. So we didn't cover that in our analysis. We just looked at pupils of age 10 and 14. The pupils, they reported their dietary intake during 1 to 3 weekdays. But most children had 2 days of dietary reporting. And they used a tool that is validated, that's called Riksmaten Flex. It's web-based and essentially it's based on a 24-hour recall method. And we were interested in looking at the intake of energy, nutrients, as well as selected food groups. So what did we find? Well, first of all, the first thing that we did was to look at the intake of of energy and different nutrients in relation to the dietary reference values that municipalities follow when they plan their school meals. And what we saw was that the intake wasn't meeting what the meal planners were actually planning for. So for most nutrients, I think folate was the one that was performing the best, but for the others, the intake was not meeting or aligning with these reference values. However, positively, the school lunch provided almost half of children's vegetable intake. If you're looking at the entire day, then the school lunch provided almost half of the total intake of vegetables. And the nutrient density was significantly higher, whilst the energy density was significantly lower for the consumption at lunch compared to the consumption during the rest of the day. Indicating that the school meal is actually contributing it's playing an important role for children to be able to have and uphold a healthy diet. When comparing boys to girls, we saw that boys had significantly higher intakes of red and processed meat, but lower intakes of fiber and vegetables, and all these intakes are energy adjusted, just so you know. And when comparing based on socioeconomic status, and in this case, we compared based on the parental education, comparing students with parents of a lower level of education with those of parents with a higher level of education. We saw that when looking at the entire day, the children of less educated parents had lower intakes of energy and most nutrients as well as vegetables. But when looking at the intake only during the school lunch, there were only differences with regards to iron and fiber. So they were eating, they were having the same intake, indicating, as we have seen previously as well, that the school meal has this ability or potential to level out social inequalities in the home environment. So that was the first study. The second study, as I mentioned, a modeling study where we aim to develop a holistic linear optimization strategy for achieving sustainable school meals. And this is also published if you're interested in looking at that. We used linear programming, the method that I described previously for this study. For the optimization, we collected data from 3 different schools. So they provided us with lists of all foods and drinks bought during the entire school year. And that list included the amount of each food, the price. We then affiliated the nutritional composition of each food as well as the climate footprint of each food. So with that information, we could then perform the optimization. And we explored different models where we aimed to fulfill, based on the baseline food supply, we wanted to have a new food supply that met all energy and nutrient recommendations that exist for school meals, that had a reduced climate impact, that was as similar as possible to the baseline food supply, but also affordable. We actually didn't have that as a requirement, but we saw that when we were performing these optimizations with regards to nutrients and climate impact and similarity, we also got a new food supply that was cheaper than the baseline cost. And the conclusion or the main finding from this study was that we were able to reduce the climate footprint from the food supply by 40%, while with quite small deviations. So each food in the food list, the food list contained around 700 foods, each food deviated on average around 15%, if we look at absolute amounts, or well, relatively to the absolute amount. And the cost did not increase. Actually, it was reduced by around 11 or 12%. And as you see as well, the optimized food supply was not a vegan or vegetarian food supply. It was an omnivorous one, where we had shifts, though, within food groups. So the main things that happened was that vegetables and roots increased through the optimizations, whereas cereals decreased. Cereals also increased, whereas meat and dairy decreased. And as I said, which is evident from this graph, is that the changes are not very extreme. We can still do quite a lot, reduce the climate impact by 40%. We're actually reaching 500 grams of carbon dioxide equivalents on average per meal, which is what the World Wildlife Fund also recommends for school lunches. In the third study, we wanted to combine this optimization approach with meal planning to achieve and serve a new sustainable school lunch menu, as well as to study the impact of this new menu on pupils' consumption and as well as satisfaction with the meals. So this was an intervention study, which we conducted in 3 different schools in Stockholm. And what we did, we had a previously served 4-week menu that was optimized in the same way as per study 2. And we optimized this previously served or baseline 4-week lunch menu so that it would be as similar as possible to the old menu. It had to meet all dietary reference values for school meals. We wanted to reduce, again, the climate footprints, and we also had constraints on each food. So all foods that were part of the baseline menu were kept in the new menu, but by at least 25%. So they could be reduced, but not more than 75%. And foods can also only double in amount, so they couldn't, increase more than 100%. Then we had a professional meal planner, because what we did was that we optimized the food list, and then we had a professional meal planner that worked in another municipality. She used this optimized food list to design or develop new recipes for this new 4-week lunch menu. And then also important to say is that we didn't, when we had this intervention, we informed pupils and parents that something was going on, but we weren't extremely, we didn't tell them that we wanted to serve a climate-friendly lunch menu. We said that, or the school informed the parents that the school is having a collaboration with the Karolinska Institute. We are testing new menu or new recipes during the spring, but that was more or less it, because we wanted to avoid potential negative reactions to this initiative from parents specifically, because we've had that experience before. And then, so we had a 4-week intervention. We wanted to see, is this something that works? Are children eating this food, or are they just, rejecting this 4-week sustainable, nutritious, affordable menu? So we needed to have some parameters to work with. So we had food waste and consumption. That was weight. So the kitchen staff, they use kitchen scales to weigh different parameters of food waste and consumption, or actually food waste, and then and they measured the food waste as well as the food that was prepared, and then through that we could calculate the consumption. And they did that for a 4-week period before the intervention, and then during the intervention as well, so we could compare food waste and consumption during the both baseline as well as during the intervention. And then we had a questionnaire measuring school meal satisfaction that was answered by students in grades 5 and 8 twice, so once during the baseline period and once by the end of the intervention period. And then we had some qualitative research, but that's in the 4th study. I'll come to that later. And so what did we find here? Well, through the optimization, first of all, we were able to reduce the climate impact again by 40% in this municipality. Again, small changes to the baseline food supply. The nutritional adequacy was ensured through the optimization. The cost was reduced by 11%. The new menu, just if you're curious, was similar in terms of dish composition. So the dishes were more or less the same in terms of the type of dishes, comparing baseline menu with the new menu. However, the composition within the recipes changed a little bit. So we had, instead of having a meat stew, we had vegetable stew with meat, more or less, if that makes it a bit more clear. So in the baseline menu, I think had 4 entirely vegetarian dishes, and the new menu had 6 entirely vegetarian dishes. So most dishes had some meat or fish, but an additional 2 recipes or dishes were entirely vegetarian, based after the optimization. But more importantly, when comparing food waste and consumption as well as school meal satisfaction, we couldn't see any changes in these parameters meaning that the children were not eating less, they were not throwing more food, and they were not less satisfied with the school meals. This was what the study showed, and this is actually one of the dishes that I tried during the intervention period. I think it's a lentil soup, and then that salad from the salad buffet and hummus, which they always had at that school. Very, very nice, I think. Scaling up sustainable school meals, the fourth study. Here we wanted to explore pupils and kitchen staff's experiences with the new menu, as well as identify barriers and facilitators to successful implementation at scale, because that's the aim, right? We want to scale up and get all children in Sweden to eat these climate-friendly, nutritious, affordable meals. So this was a qualitative study where we performed focus group discussions with students in grades 5 and 8, as well as kitchen staff, the ones preparing the meals, both before as well as during the intervention. And so it was a qualitative study that was analyzed using qualitative content analysis, and through this analysis, there were 5 different categories or themes that emerged through the interviews. And the first theme had to do with the experiences with the menu or with the intervention among kitchen staff as well as students. And this was quite an interesting thing, because when speaking to students, they, at least according to what they said, they couldn't really remember that, or they didn't notice that something had happened. Some had noticed that the food actually tasted better, which could be explained by the fact that we were quite rigorous with the kitchen staff following the recipes, which was not something that was always done before. And then some students noticed more vegetarian food during this period. However, when we spoke to the kitchen staff, they had another perception. So they perceived that the students were not happy with the food, and that they asked about the meat and complained more than usual, which is quite interesting. And that could be explained by the fact that the kitchen staff were actually more attentive to comments, because this kitchen staff knew that they had changed the meals, whereas actually the comments might have been similar to what they received before, but that they were more attentive to the comments during the intervention period, and therefore remembered these things more or reacted to it more. We also had a theme where both kitchen staff and students discussed the meaning of diet sustainability, and it was interesting. It was quite broad and varied. They spoke about everything from the shelf life of food to the climate impact of meat. So it was quite broad. Both kitchen staff and children also spoke about the importance of diet sustainability, of thinking about these things when cooking or consuming, but also about the difficulties in actually implementing that in practice, that there were other factors, especially for children, that were more important than saving the planet. So it was more about taste and yeah, especially the taste of food that steered them in their choices. And so factors influencing plant-based food acceptance, again, I would say that taste, the smell, the appearance of food, also recognition was something that emerged as an important factor influencing the acceptance of plant-based foods. Opportunities to increase plant-based food eating. This is a quite rich theme, I believe. Here they spoke about, the kitchen staff spoke about, focusing on foods or meals that children like, and not, so for example, focusing on foods like lasagna, tortilla, concepts of food rather than, because when we have lasagna or tortilla, the children don't really care if it's meat or if it's fish or if it's a vegan patty. They like the concept of eating a lasagna or eating a pasta dish or eating a tortilla or a burger. And so to focus on that, that is an opportunity to actually get children to eat more plant-based. And also to know your customers, so to speak. So in these schools, they knew that the kitchen staff knew that lentils is actually something that children like, but they don't like kidney beans. All right, well then use lentils then. So you choose the things that they know that the children like and that are equivalent, because we had in the new menu we had a lot of beans, but then they asked if they can change that to lentils instead, and we said of course, because it's why not? It's a legume, and yeah, it fills the same purpose. Other opportunities that they discussed, actually the students discussed this as an opportunity to not link plant-based eating with taking a stand on something, and to instead making it just a part of normal practice. It's just there. It's nothing that's it's just nothing that's it's nothing particular about it. It's just part of normal practice, and also what students also discussed was finding things that could motivate children to making these shifts. So, do you want to become a better student? Or do you want to perform better at your sports? Or do you want to, so finding, which is something that I think we could explore more through research, like what does actually motivate children to make dietary shifts, and to incorporate those motivators into these types of interventions or changes that we want to make in schools. And also, yeah, naming of the food was also discussed as something important. Naming the food, linking back to what children like, and also not making a fuss of it. For example, avoiding the word vegetarian. The children were actually saying, well, we like vegetables, but we don't like vegetarian food. So avoiding that word was something that came up as important. And then the last one, need of a supportive environment to achieve dietary change. Here, both kitchen staff and students, they ask for more knowledge. They want to know more about sustainable eating, why it's important, the role of this from a more global, but as well as local perspective. Kitchen staff, they asked, or they feel like they need more training in how to cook these types of meals, and as well as equipment. Some of the schools struggled with some of the dishes because they didn't have the right equipment to make these vegetable patties that they were supposed to make for the new menu. And yes, they also highlighted the importance of having everyone on board. So children, teachers, the principals, everyone, even up to the people in charge in the municipality, the politicians. Everyone needs to be on board and in making these transitions. So there are no discrepancies, because, for example, in one of the schools, we had troubles with teachers being a bit negative openly and so forth. Which the kitchen staff, they found that as quite challenging, not having the support from the teachers during the intervention. So in summary, if we summarize an entire thesis or work that we did during this 4 years, we were able to show that school meals play an important role in the overall dietary intake of children in Sweden. We were able to develop an optimization strategy for designing sustainable school meals. We were able to combine optimization with meal planning to achieve a new and sustainable school lunch menu. And we were also able to implement this optimized menu without undesirable effects on food waste, consumption, or school meal satisfaction. And ultimately, we were able to identify some barriers as well as facilitators to large-scale implementation. However, we also identify some limitations and needs for future research. And first of all, we did this study we did the intervention in 3 schools. We need to test this method more broadly, which we have done. We've tested this, we have done this study twice again, and the second study had similar results. We didn't see any changes in food waste or consumption or school meal satisfaction. The third study that was a bit more comprehensive, we had more schools in that study, which it was performed in Lund. We haven't analyzed that data yet, so we're excited about that. We also need to incorporate other aspects of sustainability. We looked at climate impact. In Sweden, there's a discussion on, that is not enough. We need to consider water use, land use, biodiversity, and other aspects that are important for environmental sustainability. So not only focusing on climate footprints. And we aim to do that as long as we have, unfortunately, we don't have good data on that, at least not representative for the Swedish context, which is why we haven't included that. We need to understand school meal acceptability more in depth because, and I say this because even though we didn't see an increased waste or a decreased consumption or a shift in school meal satisfaction, we still had we still have the same levels of waste, which were around between 25 and 35 grams per pupil per day. So we have, and this is, if we want to reach Sustainable Development Goals, we need to achieve, 0 waste as well. So we can't deal with that. In some of those schools, even though the school meal satisfaction did not change, it was actually not very good, like the satisfaction. It was actually that the school meal dissatisfaction did not change. So they were equally dissatisfied at baseline as compared to the intervention. So that's why I had that point there. We need to understand more about attitudes and ideas around the school meal in Sweden. To make a method such as the one that we develop more successful and more holistic and far-reaching. Another thing is that we didn't incorporate any pedagogical or educational components in this intervention. And this is something that we have considered and actually implemented in the third intervention in Lund, where they had several educational components as well as changing the meals. But as I said, we haven't been able to analyze that data, but it's exciting to see. And then last but not least, we need to develop automated methods, tools based on our method, because even though what we did is quite exciting and new, it required a lot of work from me specifically and from the meal planner. And in order to reach out with this method at scale, we need something that meal planners can use themselves, so that they're not dependent on a researcher or someone else to make the optimization and meal planning, or they combine meal planning optimization. So that's actually something that we're looking into, how to develop a meal planning / optimization software or tool that can be used and disseminated at scale. Not only in Sweden, but also in other contexts where school meals are served. So that's the goal. And we have applied money for that, so fingers crossed. And then before I say thank you, I would like to share a message with you that was recorded by Edgar. He's a colleague that I work with in Niassa, Mozambique. And I think I think it's a good ending to this little presentation, and I just hope that the sound works, and if it doesn't, you will have subtitles, so you will at least know what he says.
Sou Edgar Sani, residente em Niassa, em Moçambique. Em Niassa, aproximadamente uma em cada duas crianças de 0 aos 5 anos de idade sofre de desnutrição crônica. As mudanças climáticas contribuem para esta situação, uma vez que a época chuvosa em Niassa reduziu de 7 para 4 meses por ano, afetando a produção agrícola. Por isso, vamos todos nós tomar conta da natureza, pois as mudanças climáticas são uma realidade para Moçambique e o mundo em geral.
Great. I think Edgar's message really highlights why transition to sustainable diets it's so acutely necessary and why bold action it's needed. But the best thing about the problem, according to me, is that we can all here be part of the solution at least 3 times per day. So thank you. And I would like to thank my colleagues, Professor Liselotte Schäfer-Linde at Karolinska, Alexander Perlesak at Copenhagen University, Emma Pettersson at the National Food Agency, as well as Karolinska in Stockholm, and Anna-Karin Lindroos at the National Food Agency and Gothenburg University as well. Thank you.